Is weird, odd, strange, or just plain bizarre is really your cup of tea? Then, the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast will give you that fix. Can't believe it? Well, listen for yourself as we deliver the strangest news you definitely won't find on CNN or Fox. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Weird News Podcast.
Humans invented alcohol before they invented the wheel. There's still a debate on which one's more important, but I think you know where my loyalty lies. Welcome to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Carnivorous Caleb. I ate about 3 pounds of bacon today, so I'm all ready to go. We're going to start off with a bunch of horrific stories. The main one being that a Russian man was actually arrested under an anti-terror law for talking about yoga. Then we're going to go into some downright goofy stories, including 2 men robbing a convenience store wearing watermelon rinds as disguises. Our final news segment is going to be a general news segment, just a bunch of weird news for you, nothing to harp about there. We will not be bound by rules in the third segment. And then finally, I'm going to give you 10 god-dang random history facts, so make sure you stay tuned to the end. But for now, we're going to kick off my tragic section of news stories with a Russian man being arrested due to an anti-terror law after talking about his philosophy of yoga. Now, this arrested man is actually an expert on the subject, as he is a yoga teacher, and the full accusation for his arrest is, quote, illegal missionary activity, which, under new laws, is designed to combat terrorism. The talk took place at St. Petersburg Festival, so it was in front of a multitude of persons, and it was on the philosophy of yoga. Many people are calling this a, quote, Big Brother law, which, for those who haven't read 1984, is basically a totalitarian government's way of both arresting you and saying they're helping you. Which is obviously the case in Russia. Now, the laws by which this man was arrested are pretty recent. They just came into effect last year, and they weren't even signed off by President Putin until this year. And these laws include restrictions on missionary activity, religious groups, and followers of what the government deems, quote, non-traditional religions. Speaking of traditional, in the traditional Soviet Union way, this man was accused of his crime by a fellow festival goer, who reported to the government that this young man was promoting, quote, pseudo-Hindu organization. The arrested man claimed that when he was arrested, he was forced into a police car and ordered to sign a blank piece of paper, and he refused to do so. That's absolutely horrifying. Can you imagine the government taking you away and forcing you to sign a blank piece of paper? They can write whatever they want on it after you sign it. Holy Lord, that'd be terrifying. Now, it's been 2 months since his arrest, and now he only faces a fine for committing this crime. So he's not being sent to the gulags, which is great news. He's just being fined for thought crime. And the man himself actually admits to following Hinduism, but he also denies the other claims, saying, quote, I did not name a single religious organization in my speech, nor did I use a single religious book, and did not name a single religious figure apart from Christ and Buddha. Which sounds like a fair argument until he says he didn't name a religious figure apart from Christ and Buddha. That's where it kind of falls apart. They're kind of well-known religious figures. I mean, together that represents about 3 billion people's beliefs. So it's not a note that you leave in the margins. That's a pretty big mention. Nevertheless, he obviously shouldn't be punished for this. And thankfully, in Russia, many people are criticizing the new law, calling it A law open to interpretation. I think that's the wrong approach to take against this law. It's not wrong because it's open to interpretation. It's wrong because you don't get to police people on their thoughts. But it should be noted that the Russian government agrees that it is, quote, open to interpretation. They also say, quote, it's entirely unsurprising that police officers on the ground cannot work this out. Because the law exists, it's going to be implemented somehow. It cannot be implemented well because of the stupidity of the phrasing. He also went on to say, what was he calling people to join? Yoga is in no way a religious group. He's clearly never met anybody who's adamant about yoga. Anyway, it's also noted that a Hare Krishna follower was also charged with illegal missionary activity for handing out literature, and he faces a €68 fine, which is about $90. So they take this seriously, but not seriously enough to start jailing people, which is great news. However, it's clearly a violent approach to solving your cultist problems. Anyway, let's move on to our next terror story, where a woman's neck was sliced open with a sword during a Viking reenactment. I was unaware that they have Viking reenactments, so this opened up a whole new world for me. I always loved U.S. Civil War reenactments. You know, half the people pretend that they're slave owners and the other half try to kill them. So I always thought that was a nice, fun way to bring people together on a Sunday evening. Anyways, I'm going to kick this off by reassuring you that the woman did survive. However, she did suffer life-threatening injuries as a result of the neck stabbing, in case you couldn't put that together. She was hit with a sword by a man who was practicing his slick moves near a wool park in Yalding, Kent. One of the members of the reenactment says, quote, they've got proper swords. They were practicing and he caught her neck. It really was an accident, a terrible one, so I'm glad she is okay now. Thankfully, the woman was dressed in Viking armor, and she was quickly taken to the hospital, and after receiving a treatment at the scene, she was reported to have survived. Now, I have a quote from the ambulance. It's going to be rather long, so strap in for this one. Quote, we were called to reports of a woman with serious injuries in a field, and were joined by the air ambulance service. The medical team worked together to provide emergency treatment at the scene before the patient was taken to King's College Hospital by road in a life-threatening condition. The air ambulance team joined our crews to help treat the patient en route to the hospital. So it was actually a pretty serious rescue. They even had an air ambulance join their crew, which is a helicopter for those who don't know. A resident nearby during the accident said, quote, I was quite surprised because it was a lovely, quiet village. Not much happens here, and that's the way I like it. I do hope the people are okay, though. Another one said, I saw the air ambulance people gave her a blood transfusion there and then. They did it on the scene. He goes on to say, quote, it was quite shocking to see it all happen, but I'm really glad she's okay. I like how the first guy describes his village as lovely and quiet, even though they have Viking reenactments. I can't imagine that's the most quiet activity. But I know if it happened in my neighborhood, I'd show up. Alright, next terrifying story. A panther on the loose clinging to a park bench turned out to be a stuffed toy. Now this one actually happened a few weeks ago. It's a rather short story. It all began with the police being called to a park after receiving reports of a panther being on the loose. Now, this happened in the United Kingdom, and if anybody listened to my last episode, you would also know that in the United Kingdom they had baboons running around with chainsaws. So it shouldn't be to everyone's surprise that they also have a panther running around. Not the oddest thing to happen in the United Kingdom. But apparently the police raced to the park and saw what appeared to be the creature sitting on a park bench. But it turned out just to be a stuffed toy that had been left there by an unknown person. The police responded, quote, reports of a large apex predator in the staying area turned out to be true. It may be a stuffed toy, but the attending officers didn't necessarily know that at first. So this implies that when they came across the stuffed animal, they actually thought at first that it was a panther, which I imagine would be incredibly hilarious. A couple of policemen finding a panther and slowly stalking up to it with their weapons drawn. I don't know what weapons they have in the United Kingdom. with their pepper spray drawn, ready to defend themselves, just to find out that it's a plushie toy that some kid left at his park bench. That's the real victim of this story. It's not the police force. It's the child who lost his stuffed pet panther. Oh well, more tragic stories coming right up. Let's go into a deadly olive tree disease which could cost Southern Europe $22 billion. Thank God it's not grape trees. Our wine is preserved, people. Have no fear. Now, the first sick tree was noticed about 6 years ago, and a young man in southern Italy noticed that his trees looked burnt. He said, quote, "There were dead branches, brown leaves, and the situation was overall terrible," quote, "really terrible." Now, this is, of course, incredibly devastating to the Isle of Italy due to the fact that many of these farmers actually rely on these trees as a source of income, and it takes many, many years to get an olive tree started back up again. They are not small organisms, so replacing them doesn't only take money, it takes time, which these people simply don't have. In an attempt to save their trees, the young men actually tried to wash them, which of course did not help, and soon more trees contracted the disease and shriveled. Today, nearly all of them are dead. This family I talked about earlier actually had to close their business and reopen it as, quote, "an olive tree cemetery." This is getting depressing. We think we have it bad with COVID, but these olive trees, they're the real victims. One of the olive tree grove workers said, quote, "These olive trees survived wars and bad weather. They almost gave us a sense of immortality. Now I hold back my tears when I see the extraordinary beauties replaced by lifeless trunks." The disease has since spread through all of southern Europe and is said to have killed millions of olive trees since 2013. It has reached as far as both Spain and Greece. Together, those two countries produce 95% of all of Europe's olive oil. Now, of course, Europe was already devastated by the coronavirus pandemic, but is now slated to lose an extra $22 billion over the next 50 years as a result of the spreading disease. Now, I know that's really sad. I know I probably brought all you guys down, but guess what? Next segment, I'm going to bring you back up. That's the challenge. Knock you down, bring you back up. We're going to talk about some goofy goddamn stories, my favorite of which being that two men robbed a convenience store wearing watermelons on their heads. Which is not a method I have tried, but I'm open to it. You know, if I have yet to read the story, so if it turns out well for them, maybe I'll give it a shot and let you guys know how it goes. So stay tuned for all my goofy stories, and then later on I'll give you a random set of weird facts, which will not only confuse your friends at dinner parties, but will also make them think you're a crazy person. So why don't you stay tuned for that?
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
It is illegal to own only one guinea pig in Switzerland because they get lonely. Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. I have some heartwarming and funny stories to get to, And we're going to get started with this one in Vermont, where a farmer returns a prosthetic leg to a skydiver who lost it during his skydiving jump. The story began last Saturday when a double amputee went for a jump at Vermont Skydiving Adventures in West Addison. He lost one of his prosthetic legs after jumping from the plane and said, quote, "I think my adrenaline was so high and I was just so excited I didn't even realize I had lost it." Thankfully, the man was actually harnessed to an instructor, and therefore he landed safely. In an effort to recover his lost leg, he posted on social media that he lost it during the jump, and that if any local farmers could keep an eye open, that would be fantastic. And in fact, one farmer saw the post before finding the prosthetic last Sunday in his soybean field. The leg actually was slightly damaged, but relatively usable. The farmer said, quote, "You've always got to keep an eye out. It was like finding a needle in a haystack." He also said he was grateful and surprised that he found the leg without running it over with a machine during the fall harvest. Saying, quote, "God forbid the combine sucked it up, it would have destroyed it." The man who lost his leg said that it turned into a positive experience. Quote, "We kind of take for granted sometimes how many truly good people are still in this world." So that's my first nice heartwarming story for you. It's time to move on to our next one. It's not so much heartwarming as it is cute. Over 100 German shoes went missing, and it turns out that the thief was unmasked to be a fox. He was caught last week and is accused of having stolen over 100 shoes in Germany's capital city of Berlin. Apparently in Berlin it's common practice to leave their footwear outside of their houses, and as a result many of these shoes went missing. Authorities at first believed it to be people who were stealing these shoes, but it was quickly discovered that a fox was stealing them instead after a young man took a picture of the animal stealing a shoe and posted it on Facebook. He then posted the picture on Germany's community notice sharing platform board, where the news quickly spread, making this fox somewhat of a celebrity in this big town. It's pretty funny. If you want to Google the picture, it's just a cute little fox stealing a blue flip-flop. Quite adorable. Later on, they actually found the fox's stash. And apparently he was interested in mostly the brightest shoes he could find. So there is a sneaking suspicion that he has an affinity for fashion, flamboyant fashion. If you look at these photos, all the shoes are brightly colored. It's pretty cute. A fox stealing a rainbow of shoes. The Berlin community has since put out a notice saying which shoes have been found, and as a result, many people are being reunited with their old pairs of footwear. Isn't that adorable? This reminds me of a not-so-adorable story. In Colorado, where I live, there's a mountain right next to Pikes Peak. It's called Crystal Park, and there's a lot of mountain lions on this mountain. Anyway, one of my buddies actually lost his dog up there to a mountain lion, and eventually he tracked down its collar. But when he found it, it was in a small cave, and in that small cave was not a mountain lion, but was a couple dozen other dog collars. So the mountain lion would just find a dog and drag it back to its cave, and therefore collected a treasure trove worth of dog collars. Pretty scary, would make an excellent movie scene. And perhaps even a decent wind chime. If you live in the mountains near ferocious animals, do not buy a small dog. They'll just end up as a snack. But we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about heartwarming stories. So now we're going to go back to the heartwarming stories with my Florida story of the week. That's my weekly Florida story of the week. Where a man tries to evade arrest by doing gymnastics. This was, of course, caught on film, as all fantastic Florida stories are. This young Orlando man was avoiding police. This was after being charged with battery on law enforcement officers. And he also got the title of resisting arrest after his little cartwheel. According to police records, the police got him on the ground only for him to break free. As the man tried to escape, he executed a nice cartwheel into a tight space to avoid the cops' pursuit. However, the cartwheel did not deter them long, and eventually they nabbed him quite quickly and subdued him. Now, this article also mentions that the man is a 40-year-old, and from the video itself, it's well aware that he weighs as much as me, around like 250. So it's pretty impressive that he did a cartwheel in his evasion maneuvers. However, it's also not surprising that he ended up getting caught and is now being charged with resisting arrest as a result. And upon watching the video, you will realize that this man also attempted to do a handstand. It doesn't go so well. He falls over pretty quickly, and looks like he injures himself. It's become quite apparent that he was likely under the influence, of drugs. And it actually ended up taking 2 different officers to detain him completely. And even then, he attempted to escape, but it did not go well. He got... not beat up, but he got roughly detained. I recommend that you go check this video out online. It's pretty funny. He'll probably get off pretty lightly. Now, if you can't tell, I'm actually pretty impressed by this fella. I mean, it's not an Escape from Alcatraz level of impressive, but it's got some imagination to it. It's not my go-to escape. This brings to mind a video from a few years ago. I think it was 2018. Where a California man, he was caught breakdancing on the security camera during his looting of the facility. It's pretty fun to watch. The guy breaks in, steals a bunch of stuff, and then right in front of the security camera busts a couple of moves, which eventually led police to track him down and return the stolen goods. So take notes, people. Don't avoid police by breakdancing or doing gymnastics. It just doesn't end well. Alright, finally, the story we've all been waiting for. 2 men rob a U.S. convenience store wearing watermelon rind as disguises. So they wore watermelons on their heads with little slits for eyes. It's pretty funny looking. This story surfaced in Virginia after local police uploaded a picture of the heist to social media in order to aid their search for the 2 men accused of robbing the convenience store. This took place last month, May 6th, and apparently nobody has any leads on this story. In fact, the police said, quote, they managed to elude authorities thanks to their brilliant disguises. So even the police recommend wearing watermelons on your head in order to get away with robbing a place. Perhaps this is all a ruse. Perhaps this is all a social media stunt by the police to get more people who rob liquor stores to wear watermelons on their heads, because I can't imagine it would be an efficient way to do such an activity. I don't know the statistics, but I'm willing to bet that the more likely you are to wear a watermelon on your head, the more likely you are to get caught after robbing a liquor store. I'll have to do a study on that and let you guys know how it turns out. Now, it wasn't until about a month and a half later, last Sunday, when authorities eventually arrested a 20-year-old in connection with the, quote, melon drama. Oh, that's clever. Good job, New York News. I wonder if Robbie Canton gave them that joke. The young man brought into custody was booked with 3 different charges: misdemeanor larceny of alcohol, misdemeanor possession of alcohol by an underage person, and felony prohibition of wearing a mask/face covering in public. Now that last one, I don't think should be applied to any modern robbery, wearing a mask/face covering in public, considering the fact that it is now mandatory for you to wear a mask/face covering in public. So I think they should strike that one from the record and let the man go on that one accusation. Also, this man is quite brave. He didn't give up his partner in crime. The police are still on the lookout for the second person. Eventually, the police questioned a witness at the scene, and the customer said, quote, their disguises fell in the thin line between stupid and clever. She goes on to say, quote, I think it's ridiculous, innovative, but ridiculous. The amount of work that you have to do to actually hollow out a watermelon to stick it on your head, I think, is kind of crazy. Now, I think it should be taken into account that the kids were stealing alcohol. So I don't want to jump to any conclusions and say how this started, but my guess is that it started with them carving out a nice watermelon dinner over some fresh brandy. They ran out of brandy, and they said, oh my gosh, we need some more, but we don't have any money and we're underage. What do we do? Well, we have these empty watermelons. Why don't we put these on our heads and go heisting our local liquor store? That's how I would assume this story began. It began with alcohol, and it ends with alcohol. And will most likely end with 2 people in prison, but if it doesn't, at least one of them is in prison. Anyway, it's time to move on. It looks like we have time for one more story before the break. I'm going to go with the U.S. Space Force hiring a horse to walk on beaches. Now, I believe that this story began the same way all governmental spending projects began. The boss goes up to his little accountant there and says, hey, Bob, how much money do we have left? And Bob says, enough for a horse. And then the boss says, okay, let's hire a horse to walk on the beach endlessly. Now, this is the Space Force, so they have no business buying a horse unless it's going to be a space horse, which I highly doubt they're planning on interspatial cavalry charges. I clearly don't know what I'm talking about, but neither do they, obviously. Anyways, they bought a horse, they named it Ghost. That's all nice and cute. That's why this is in the cute story section. He's a 5-year-old Mustang, and he was added to the, quote, Conservation Military Working Horse Program, which for some reason is part of the Space Force. This story is making less and less sense as we go on. Now, when the manager of the Military Working Horse Program was questioned about this whole situation, he said that the horse is a sort of quadrupedal conservation cop. That's a direct quote. I don't know what it means, and he doesn't know what it means either. Come on, don't even pretend like you know, man. Now, apparently it's their job to traverse hills and beaches while keeping an eye on the many protected species and any intruders that might pose a threat to them. But why is this under Space Force? This doesn't make any sense. In Space Force's defense, one of their fellow workers said, quote, we enforce fish and game laws, and the horses help us walk off the beaten path to complete our mission. We have even responded to lost hunters and hurt animals. So that's all well and good, but why is this part of the Space Force? This should be part of, like, wildlife preserve. I just find it bizarre. Clearly they don't know what they're doing with our tax dollars. It's kind of a shame they're not sending them to space. I would be all for this if they actually were. Space horses is something I'm not willing to give my tax money to any organization unless they promise me a space horse. I don't know about you guys, but that's my political affiliation. Anyways, that's it for the happy stories. That's what I consider a happy story. Next, we're going to go into some random weird news stories, including Chick-fil-A and Taco Bell locations that'll give you free food in exchange for extra rolled coins. Do you see the problem with that headline? Well, I'll dive deep into it if you can't. Right after this break, and coming up after that, I'll give you top 10 weird history facts in no particular order. So stay tuned if you want to get deep and dirty into that.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
The national animal of Scotland is the unicorn. Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. We're going to get into some random weird news stories, starting off with President Rodrigo Duterte of the Philippines, who is now ordering people to clean their masks with petrol. And if you don't know what petrol is, it's basically gasoline. He also went on to say, quote, "I'm not joking." So he's well aware of the absurdity of this recent order, but for some reason he's actually promoting it seriously. Quickly after the statement was made, officials were quick to correct him and suggest that it was a joke. Of course, health officials came out and said that cloth masks should be washed normally and surgical masks should be replaced after use. But even after his officials defended him by saying that it was just a joke, the president went on to say, quote, "What I've said was true. Go to a gasoline station." Now they go on to say in this article that there is no evidence that gasoline can disinfect masks. Quote, "Having prolonged contact with gasoline can be harmful, and pouring flammable liquids can be a fire risk." Now, if you didn't know that flammable liquids carry a fire risk, my guess is you shouldn't be handling flammable liquids. But clearly this president just has a little ego problem. The poor fella. He also said in the fury of 1,000 Star Wars prequels, quote, "They, the critics, said Duerte's insane. Stupid. If I'm insane, you should be president, not me. What I've said was true. If alcohol isn't available, especially for the poor, just go to a gasoline station and use gas to disinfect it. I'm not joking. I am not joking. You tried to get inside my brain." So when it comes voting time in the Philippines next season, please cast your vote. I'm not going to say who to vote for, but clearly this man has an ego problem, and it's gotten to the point where it's very likely endangering people, especially poor people who don't have access to such information, as the man said himself in his quote. He then went on to say, "At the end of the day, hang the mask somewhere and spray it with Lysol if you can afford it. For people who don't have Lysol, drench it in gasoline or diesel. Just find some gasoline and dip your hand with the mask in it." The president's spokesman then tried to defend him once again, saying, quote, "I can't believe that after 4 years of him as president, you still don't know him. It's only a joke. Why would we use gasoline for washing?" Now, these statements came out from the president after there was a dramatic increase of 3,954 cases of COVID-19 in the Philippines last Thursday, which brought the total number to 89,374 cases, and unfortunately a total of 2,000 confirmed COVID-related deaths. So they actually do have a pretty big problem in the Philippines. However, I don't think I'm telling any tales out of school when I say that it's probably not the best idea to soak your mask in gasoline, unless you're trying to, have a fun Friday night. Anyways, time to move on before I get sued. To the, quote, "saddest pandemic dining experience in America." This restaurant is holding their lunches in a mall parking garage. This occurred in Los Angeles County, where an elderly gentleman was determined to keep his family's restaurant open. This eatery has been open in this food court for over 3 decades, and in order to stay open, the man had his employees run snacks of foam clamshell encased kebabs to customers as they waited in their vehicles, turning the entrance to the adjacent parking garage into a makeshift drive-through restaurant. So they're being quite innovative. However, if you don't want to be eating in a restaurant filled with car emissions, I would recommend going to Taco Bell or something, but we'll get to the Taco Bell story later. Now, when the mall proposed the idea of using the the bottom floor of a 3-story parking garage as an eating area, the restaurant was actually pretty excited about it. They even posted many photos on social media. However, the responses were not generous, painting the situation as, quote, "a virus-induced dystopian nightmare." However, due to the large size of the garage, it's 6,300 square feet, the garage can actually fit 75 people comfortably even after social distancing laws have been adhered to. However, reviews of this new version of the restaurant have not been positive. Apparently there are a lot of cars driving by quickly, with the sound of tires screeching and the smack of tread rickets throughout the entire garage. Of course, all the sounds in there echo around a bunch as well. So whenever somebody honks or their car alarm goes off, it disturbs everybody for minutes on end in a very painful manner. However, it should be mentioned that some people like it. Apparently, one lady said, quote, "I've thought that the setup isn't all that much worse than eating from a food truck. From certain angles, the endless concrete expanse accepted with the primary color arrows and the center lines could almost work as a dining concept. And with the cavernous shade of the cross breeze, the garage is in many ways an improvement over the in-street dining on a busy road, where your meal is served with an uneasy feeling that speeding vehicle could land on your table at any minute." So she's taking it with humor, which is great. And that's what this is all about. You can still safely eat your meal outside if you want to in a social distance manner, and of course you can still get it for takeout if you please. However, the restaurant also mentioned that their competition is stiff, with another mall right across the road offering grass and seating, plus a dancing fountain for entertainment. The man called it a, quote, coronavirus-era theme park. Which does sound like steep competition, I'm not gonna lie. You can either eat 6 feet away from speeding cars about to crash into you, or you can eat next to a nice fountain while sitting on some grass with your family. Nevertheless, this entrepreneur is not giving up at just restaurants. In his garage, he is also now showing drive-in movies. So that's good to hear. He's expanding his business. It must be working to some extent. It should also be noted that long-term patrons of this restaurant are saying that it's a brilliant way to let people sit and relax during this crazy time. 3 men who have been going out for coffee for 15 years at this mall have said, quote, "The garage dining area has provided a convenient place for them to safely gather once again. However, they do have some ideas for improvements, believe it or not. They need bathrooms for people out here," one of them says. Another one says, quote, "Let's put an outdoor grill with barbecue smoke, hanging plants, a little bar, soda, juice, wine, beer. No hard liquor, though. A little mariachi band. That would be fantastic. Then take all the small stores and bring them outside in tents. And a Dunkin' Donuts outdoors." I like the way this Gary fella thinks. I bet there are no practicality issues there whatsoever, and they would do just fine with all of those restaurants and businesses outside in a small garage while filling the entire area with the smoke from the restaurants themselves. That would go excellently with traffic whizzing by. Another patron said, quote, "The virus is here to stay for a while. We've got to be ingenious, creative. We won't be captive." So despite the grotesque criticism of this nice little garage restaurant, it's clearly making some people happy, and isn't that what matters? Who cares if they accidentally kill themselves by going out and eating in public? I probably should cut that out. Oh well. Now, as a final catharsis, I'm going to read a quote from the owner of the business. He says, "We gave it a shot, and to our surprise, people were actually coming. God willing, when this pandemic is over, I think people will still enjoy, or maybe even prefer, being outdoors." So he thinks he's revolutionizing the way businesses are held. He thinks they'll be held in the basements of garages once this craziness is over. But hey, more power to him. If it's working out for him, let it continue working out for him. That's the free market in progress. Isn't it beautiful, people? Being locked in the basement of garages. All right, time for our third and final weird story of this segment. And that's that Chick-fil-A and Taco Bell locations are giving away free food in exchange for extra rolled coins. Now, I asked you earlier if you saw the problem with this title, so I'll read it again. Chick-fil-A and Taco Bell locations will give you free food in exchange for your extra rolled coins. Did you see it? Okay, I'm going to say it one more time, but I'm going to change the wording a little bit. Restaurants will give you free food in exchange for money. That's brilliant. Dude, I got some free food. All I had to do was give them money. I love this. This is so funny. But apparently this started due to the coins shortage in America. For those who don't know, is a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. I'm not entirely sure why, nor is anybody else, but apparently rolled coins have been hard to come across. As a result, restaurants are finding it harder and harder to get enough change in order to give people their due change after paying for their food. And at least one Chick-fil-A and one Taco Bell location had to resort to trading free food for rolls of coins. I pointed out the problem with this earlier. Now, once this fallacy was pointed out, that coins do in fact cost money because they are money, Chick-fil-A came out with a new flyer saying, "We will trade you coins for dollar bills, and we will still give you free food." Perhaps that was their initial offer, and they just weren't clear about it in the first place. Either way, I think it's quite hilarious. Nevertheless, I find this coin shortage quite disturbing, so if you have one of those old jars filled with coins, why don't you bring them in, buy some Taco Bell, maybe they'll throw a free taco your way, and everyone's better off for it. Maybe I should have put this in the happy news section. But I also think this would be an opportune time to get rid of some of these coins. We don't need the pennies. Get rid of them. We don't need nickels. Get rid of them. Dimes are cool because they're nice and small and cute, and quarters are cool because they're nice and fat and big. So we can keep those around. But the rest, get rid of them. We don't need them. They're probably just spreading the disease anyways. What are people thinking? This is how we're all going to die. I don't want to be an alarmist, though. Chick-fil-A came out with a statement later on, quoting the success of their program. They said, "Wow, we had no idea this response we'd get from this request. Due to the overwhelming response, we are updating this opportunity to 9 to 11 a.m. So, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Basically, they're just limiting the time you can bring in your rolls of coins from 9 to 11 a.m. And they're saying you can do it on Wednesday, 7/29 only. That's in the past. What a bummer. They'll probably do it again next Wednesday unless they have enough coins to service them for the rest of the pandemic, which is highly unlikely. They say for every $10 worth of rolled coins people trade in for bills, they will give away one free coupon offer. Maximum 10 per guest. They will be doing this again in the future, so stay tuned for updates. Go ahead and subscribe to Chick-fil-A's news board if that's something you're interested in for some reason. I never thought running out of pennies would be a problem, but here we are. Welcome to 2020, folks. All right, we're going to get right on with our next segment. It's just random weird facts in no particular order. Most of them are going to be history facts because you guys know I like history, and I hope you do too. So if you do, stick around. You'll have a heck of a time. We'll get to that right after this break.
The GSMC Life and Happiness podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Eggplants are technically berries. Welcome back to the GSMC Weird News Podcast. We're going to do my top 10 weird history facts. Perhaps we'll do a few extra just to fill out time. I'm getting kind of desperate. It's a Friday, folks. I don't want to work too hard, and I don't think you'd want me to, would you? Alright, let's jump right in. Number 10, Napoleon was once attacked by a gang of rabbits. So in case it wasn't embarrassing enough to lose 90% of his forces while attacking the Russians, it is also well known in history that Napoleon's most upsetting defeat actually came when he was attacked by a relentless horde of rabbits. Now, of course, there are a couple versions of this story. Some people agree that it was confabulated by the English and other oppositions to Napoleon in order to make him look like a goddamn little goof. But most people actually agree that this is a true story. Now, most embarrassing enough for Napoleon, this actually happened right after the treaties of Tilsit, which actually ended the war between him and Russia. So after that grisly defeat, he was looking to celebrate. And so he proposed a rabbit hunt, which is how all wars should end. A little rabbit hunt. Wouldn't that be adorable? The losers go get judged at Nuremberg, and the winners go hunt rabbits. Now, it's said that he collected as many as 3,000 bunnies in order to service his party needs. And apparently when they were all released, they did not scurry in fright, but instead they bounded toward Napoleon and his men guarding him. Hundreds of the fuzzy bunnies gunned it for the world's most powerful man. At first, it is said that his men had a good laugh, but then the onslaught continued, and as a result, their concern grew. Apparently, they stormed the man's legs and started climbing up all the way up to his jacket. Napoleon tried shooing them away with his little riding crop, which is what you hit a horse with, and his men grabbed sticks and tried to chase them away themselves. But apparently none of this helped. The bunnies kept coming. Eventually, Napoleon fled to his carriage, but the attack did not stop. According to historian David Chandler, quote, "With a finer understanding of Napoleonic strategy than most of his generals, the rabbit horde divided into two wings and pounded around the flanks of the party and headed for the imperial coach." They then leapt onto his carriage and caused more carnage. The attack did not stop until the carriage rolled away. Now, it's pretty odd that they didn't scamper away right when they were released. Most people say that this was a result of them not being wild rabbits, but rather family pets. And as a result, they were not afraid of humans as they should have been if they were from the wild. Alright, number 9, the government poisoned alcohol during the Prohibition. Alright, so you guys know my position on the Prohibition. I don't think alcohol should be illegal, and I actually think that the current drug war is a prohibition on drugs. Perhaps I'm a lunatic. You guys know that already, though, don't you? Anyway, that's not the story. The story is that during the Prohibition, the government poisoned alcohol so people wouldn't drink it. This occurred due to the fact that people were drinking more and more alcohol after the ban. And as a result, law officials got frustrated and eventually decided to spike the booze with some poison. By the end of Prohibition in 1933, the federal poisoning program is estimated to have killed at least 10,000 individuals. This is why the war on drugs and alcohol just doesn't go well. There's so many externalities. It's not good at all. You're trying to protect people by preventing them from drinking. So what you inadvertently cause is people dying. It doesn't seem like that's a beneficial way to handle the problem. Maybe just let people drink what they want to drink and do what they want to do drug-wise. Let them face their own consequences for such activities. If some idiot wants to drink himself silly, why not let him? He's only hurting himself. Allow people to make mistakes. It's okay. That section made me all thirsty. Okay, number 8. Pope Gregory the, Fourth? Declared war on cats. Alright, so this is a pretty quick one. In the 13th century, the man declared war on the cats. He said that black cats were instruments of Satan. Because of this belief, he ordered the extermination of these felines throughout all of Europe. However, the plan did backfire, thank God, as it resulted in an increase in the population of plague-carrying rats. So, I don't know if that's a good backfire. Obviously, there should have been backlash for him trying to kill a bunch of cute old kittens, but I don't think the Black Plague is a good punishment for that. It's a bit harsh. Alright, that was a nice quick one. Number 7. President Abraham Lincoln is in the Wrestling Hall of Fame. So, before he took office, he was actually declared a wrestling championship. Most people don't know this, but he was actually 6'4", which is just unbelievably tall for the time, and he had only one loss among his 300 contests. He earned a reputation for this in New Salem, Illinois, as an elite fighter. Eventually, he earned his country's wrestling championship, which is just beautiful. In case you didn't have enough amazing accomplishments, we should do a top 10 on good old Abe Lincoln one day. It would be super interesting. But for now, we have to move on. Wait, before we move on, most people also don't know this. He was actually a bartender. I'm just going to throw that in there because, I don't know, maybe we'll do a top 10 of Abe Lincoln in the future, but he was a licensed bartender, and he actually opened up his own bar called Barry and Lincoln. But unfortunately, the shop eventually closed because his partner, Mr. Barry, consumed most of the shop's supply of alcohol. He was an alcoholic. Alright, number 6. Calvin Coolidge owned a pair of lions. Now, I know most people aren't interested in Calvin Coolidge, but he's actually my favorite U.S. president, just because he's, like, all laid back and quiet, and he actually didn't do anything, because I figure most presidents just tend to screw things up. Anyways, he owned 2 lions. They were given to him while they were still cubs by the government of South Africa. And so what did he name them? He named them Tax Reduction and Budget Bureau. So clearly he just used them as a statement. He probably didn't actually have them in his residence, obviously. It's well known that he was an introvert and basically wouldn't be the kind of person to want to own 2 lions in the first place. Which is why I find this story funny. It's kind of an interesting dichotomy. Alright, number 5. Charlie Chaplin once entered a Charlie Chaplin look-alike contest, and he came in 20th place. Now, an article in 1920 read, quote, Charlie Chaplin was one day at a fair in the United States where a principal attraction was a competition as to who could best imitate Charlie Chaplin's walk. The real Charlie Chaplin thought there might be a chance for him, so he entered the performance, minus his celebrated mustache and his boots. He was a frightful failure and came in 20th. Now, I would recommend that you go and look up a photo of what Charlie Chaplin looks like without his tramp makeup on, without his mustache on. It's pretty funny. He actually looks like a young starlet. He's an incredibly handsome young man, and so it's funny to imagine him trying and failing miserably at this competition after succeeding so much in writing, directing, and acting, being one of the most influential peoples in the film industry during the early decades of film. Alright, number 4. Heroin was once a perfectly acceptable medicine prescribed for everything from coughs to headaches. Once first discovered, heroin was quoted to be more useful than morphine and codeine. They began production of the drug and even commercial sale in 1898. Its clinical results were so promising that it was, quote, considered a wonder drug. The only problem is that it works so well that people become heroin dependent as their tolerance dissipates and they become heroin addicts. It wasn't until the 1910s that people discovered the euphoric aspects of heroin and used it as intravenous administration for happiness. Of course, it was quickly made illegal to the vast majority of the public, but still remained for several years as a drug to potentially be used for extreme cases. Alright, number 4, the Anglo-Zanzibar War in 1896 was the shortest war in recorded history. If you couldn't figure it out, it was between the United Kingdom and the Zanzibar Sultanate, and it lasted only 38 minutes. Now, this all occurred when one of the Zanzibar sultans died. He was very favorable to the British, and when he died, a not-so-favorable person replaced him, and as a result, this eventually led to a war. It wasn't much of a battle. Basically, the new sultan just placed guards around his palace to barricade himself, and in response, the British attacked. It involved 3 cruisers, 2 gunboats, and 150 marines, versus the 900 Zanzibarians. And out of all the people who died, it was roughly 500 casualties on the Sultan's side, and only 1 on the British side. So I don't really need to tell you who ended up winning that. Time to move on to number 3. Now, this one's just short and goofy. Basically, this was the time before alarm clocks, and as a result, poor people were hired to be, quote, knockers up, and basically what they would do is they would walk from door to door, and they would shoot peas out of a blowgun, hitting people's windows in order to wake them up in the morning. This was not a popular job for children, even though it might seem like it. Most of these people were old widows who had no better means to make money. Which is kind of sad, but I think it would be a fun job, wouldn't it? Walking door to door at 6 a.m., just waking up people, pissing them all off, shooting peas at their windows. It said that some of them, if the houses were on the ground level, they would just walk up to the windows and tap on them, which would be incredibly terrifying to wake up when the sun is just barely coming up and to see a shadow at your window tapping on it. Slightly horrifying, but dreadfully entertaining, if you ask me. Alright, number 2, the molasses tsunami of 1919. So this occurred in Boston, Massachusetts, of course. This is kind of a well-known fact. A 90-foot wide cast iron tank containing 2.5 million gallons of crude molasses. It was purposed for rum manufacture. It exploded. Most likely because of its contents had expanded during a rapid overnight rise in temperature in the streets. The tank was set 50 feet above street level, and its entire content spilled within just a few seconds onto the streets of Boston, with no warning whatsoever. The wall of molasses was at sometimes going as fast as 35 miles per hour and reached a height of 15 feet. So it was actually more dangerous than a tsunami. There are some pictures of this online, and you can see pretty clearly that it completely demolished entire buildings, tearing them from their very foundations. It even carried off vehicles and drowned horses. That is so sad. 21 people were drowned during the incident, and 150 were injured. The cleanup took many months to occur, and many decades after, people still claim that they can smell the molasses when the weather is hot, and I do not doubt it. When you look at these pictures, it's absolutely devastating. It's kind of funny how it happened, but once again, it's not funny that it happened. 21 people dying is not fun, but as I say in almost every episode, that would be a happy way for me to die, in a vat of molasses. Alright, number 1, the death of Rasputin. For those who don't know, Rasputin was kind of a miracle worker during the First World War for the Russian nobility, and he was eventually murdered by a group of nobles because they were jealous and upset that he kept saving the king's daughter. That's a whole other story, though. The important thing is how Rasputin died. It's the most epic death of all time. So the best account we have of this comes from the man who actually murdered him, who wrote in his memoirs that he invited Rasputin into his home shortly after midnight and ushered him into the basement. The man then offered Rasputin tea and cakes which had been laced with cyanide. Rasputin initially refused the cakes but then began to eat them, and to the nobleman's surprise, he did not appear to be affected by the poison. Rasputin then asked for some wine, which had also been poisoned, and he ended up drinking 3 entire glasses, with no signs of distress. The man trying to kill him then went upstairs, where he talked to his fellow conspirators, and eventually he just decided to take a revolver and shoot him in the room. He wrote in his memoirs that he returned to the room, pulled out his gun, aimed it at Rasputin's head, and said, "Better look at the crucifix and say a prayer." He aimed at Rasputin's chest and shot him once. The man immediately assumed that Rasputin was dead, so they went to Rasputin's house to collect his valuables. When they returned, they went down to the basement in order to collect his body, and Rasputin jumped up and leapt at the man, attacking him. Rasputin eventually fled upstairs, where he was followed, and in the courtyard of the small palace, he was shot 3 different times. Isn't that something? After these 3 extra shots, he was still moving. So then the gang of noblemen walked up to him and stabbed him numerous times before he finally died. It's said that he did not even die as a result of the stabs, but he actually died when they threw him in the Volga River. But that last part is highly speculative. So just to sum this up, he was heavily poisoned multiple times, shot 4 times, and stabbed numerous times before being drowned in a river. Beautiful, the most amazing death of all time. He had a very weird life. He was basically a modern wizard. A modern Merlin, if anybody knows that story. Anyways, we're over time, which means I have to thank you for listening to the GSMC Weird News Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. While I'm at it, I may as well ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review, because it really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and the Instagram, that would be excellent. Thank you. Have a goddamn good weekend, folks.